He crawled beneath the iron skeleton of Elkhorn Bridge, bleeding, bound, and barely conscious. Snow fell like silence from the heavens, burying him inch by inch in a frozen grave no one knew to look for. And then came the sound of paws. Not swift, not strong, but steady. A scarred old German shepherd, limping on a wounded leg, drawn by a scent only his soul remembered. He didn't wear a vest. He didn't answer to orders. But he came anyway, not for glory, not for praise, but because somewhere in the dark, someone needed him. This isn't a tale about heroes in capes. It's about a forgotten rescue dog who never forgot how to rescue. About a broken man tied beneath a bridge, and the beast who refused to let him die there. What happened next would expose a crime ring, redeem an old man's guilt, and rebuild something Elkhorn thought it had lost forever. Faith. But don't be mistaken. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about instinct, redemption, and the kind of loyalty that never fades. Before we begin, hit the like button, subscribe if you believe in second chances, and tap the bell. Because stories like this, they don't just warm hearts. Sometimes they wake them.
The wind swept low across the hollow bones of Elkhorn, Wyoming, a town stitched together with rusted iron and blue-collar memory. It was January, and the sky had turned the color of unspoken grief. Snow hadn't yet started to fall, but the cold had already sunk into the earth, into the pipes, the walls, the people. Streetlights flickered above cracked pavement, buzzing like tired bees. Most of the factories that once made Elkhorn roar had long since shuttered, but a few held on, coughing smoke into the gray air. Raymond Doyle walked with his head low and hands stuffed deep into the pockets of a faded canvas work coat. At 43, Raymond had the kind of body built from labor, broad shoulders, thick hands, a crooked back from years of lifting what machines couldn't. His face was weathered, not from age, but from disappointment, framed by a dark beard trimmed close, with streaks of early gray curling around his temples. His brown eyes, once sharp and bright, had softened, dulled by years of wear. He walked with a slight limp from an accident 6 months ago, when a steel beam had collapsed at the Ridgepoint construction site and shattered his ankle. Since then, work had dried up, medical bills had grown, and his world had narrowed to a single goal: keep his son alive. Raymond's son, Jesse, was 8 years old. Born with a rare blood disorder, Jesse needed regular treatment at the Elkhorn Clinic, which had lately become more lenient than medical. They allowed late payments and overlooked missed appointments, but the bills didn't stop. Tonight, Raymond had finished a shift helping haul scrap metal at a salvage yard on the edge of town. It wasn't legal work and it wasn't safe, but it was cash. As he cut through an alley behind the shuttered mill, something felt wrong. There was a sound, muffled boots, hurried breathing, the metallic click of a knife unsheathing. And then, everything turned black. Far to the north, where Elkhorn's skeletal buildings gave way to pine-covered hills, the air was different, cleaner, sharper. There, beneath a thicket of spruce and fir, lay an old logging road now forgotten by most. A dilapidated hunting shack leaned against the slope, its roof half collapsed under old snow. Beneath the porch, curled tight against the wind, was a German shepherd named Ranger. Ranger was 10 years old, with a sable black coat now faded around the muzzle and legs. He was large, broad-shouldered for a shepherd, with amber eyes that still carried the alertness of training, but now dulled by loneliness. A thin white scar curved under his left eye, and his right hind leg bore a faint limp from an old injury in the field. Once, he had been a proud member of a K-9 search and rescue unit in Montana. He had tracked avalanche victims, sniffed out lost hikers, and barked signals that brought rescue crews to weeping families. But after his handler, a young officer named Carter Mills, was killed in a mountain rescue gone wrong, Ranger had been retired. The department had offered him to another handler, but no one stepped forward. Eventually, he was driven out to the hills and left. The assumption was simple: dogs forget. But Ranger didn't forget. He didn't forget the scent of blood and snow, the panic in human voices, the weight of duty, and he didn't forget the betrayal. Most days now, Ranger scrounged for food near dumpsters behind a shuttered ranger station or chased scents that disappeared into wind. He didn't howl. He didn't bark. But tonight, something in the air shifted. A tension like a taut string. From the south, where the wind dipped low toward Elkhorn's bridge, came a trace. A smell not of animal or food, but of pain. Human pain. Ranger's ears lifted. His body stiffened. He stood, ignoring the protest in his hind leg, and turned his head toward town. Then he moved, slowly at first, then faster, instinct awakening like an old fire. Back beneath the bridge that arched over the abandoned railway line, Raymond groaned softly. His hands were tied behind his back with heavy nylon rope, tight enough to cut circulation. Blood trickled from a wound near his temple. His breath came out in shallow puffs, visible in the bitter air. Whoever had taken him didn't care if he was found. They wanted silence. The men, Raymond had glimpsed 2 of them, wore construction jackets from Ridgepoint. But these weren't laborers. They had tools for things that had nothing to do with building. Raymond had overheard something, a transaction involving stolen copper piping and blank invoices tied to Elkhorn's new courthouse project. He hadn't meant to hear it, but that didn't matter. A freezing mist began to drift in from the riverbanks. Above, clouds gathered, thick and low, ready to burst. The weather forecast had warned of an ice storm before dawn, but Raymond wouldn't see dawn, not without help. Meanwhile, Ranger moved through side streets and alleys with purpose, his nose close to the ground, following that scent: pain, blood, fear. A crow caught above him and took flight as the dog crossed into the eastern edge of town, paused silent on frozen dirt. Inside a small, cluttered apartment above Maynard's diner, Howard Briggs stirred his coffee and looked out at the approaching storm. 60 years old, short and stout with a potbelly hidden under a worn flannel shirt, Howard had once been a handler too, though no one in town knew it. He'd lost his wife to cancer 3 winters ago and since then had lived in silence, surrounded by old medals and unopened letters. Years ago, he had trained dogs like Ranger, brave, eager, loyal. But after one deployment ended in tragedy, he left the unit and never looked back. When he saw a familiar flash of black and tan fur pass under the street lamp below, Howard's breath caught. He leaned closer to the glass. Could it be? The limp, the scar? Ranger, he whispered, the name crumbling in his throat like ash. He didn't even put on a coat before he was out the door, coffee abandoned on the counter. And above it all, the storm finally broke. Snow fell, slow and deliberate at first, then in heavy gusts that buried the sidewalks and blurred the outlines of buildings. Beneath Elkhorn Bridge, Raymond's eyes fluttered. He didn't know it, but help, unlikely, unexpected, unwanted by some, was coming, on 4 legs, with breath misting in the cold and memory burning in his heart. Ranger hadn't forgotten, and tonight he would not fail. Snow had become a curtain, thick, relentless, and nearly soundless. It coated everything in layers of white that muffled footsteps and swallowed voices. The bridge that arched across the old railway line outside Elkhorn was built of rusted iron and poured concrete, a forgotten crossing from a forgotten time. Tonight, its underbelly hid a man on the brink of vanishing. Raymond Doyle stirred. His breath hitched, shallow and broken. The cold had pressed its way into his bones, a steady invasion that numbed him from the outside in. His hands, bound tightly behind his back with rough nylon cord, had long gone numb. Blood had dried on his temple, crusted against his hairline. His jaw ached from the gag stuffed into his mouth, a scrap of thick cloth that reeked of oil and sweat. The air tasted like iron and cold stone. Somewhere above, a snowplow passed, but the sound was faint, distant. No one knew he was here. No one would look. He blinked slowly, vision clouded. Snow gathered on his chest. He was fading. Miles north, across the low valley that cradled Elkhorn's quiet outskirts, Ranger moved like a ghost through the storm. His limp was more pronounced now, his back leg dragging just slightly with each step, but his movement was deliberate. His ears flicked forward, then back. He was picking up something faint, inconsistent, but familiar. The scent of adrenaline, of human fear. It was buried under layers of snow, but it was there. He paused at a fork in the trail and sniffed the wind. Then he turned right toward the bridge. Back in town, a new figure entered the story. Deputy Caroline Carey Bell parked her cruiser outside the Elkhorn substation and killed the engine. She was tall and lean, in her late 30s, with close-cropped dark auburn hair and a face both sharp and tired. Her eyes were steel gray, always scanning, always thinking. A decade ago, she'd served in the National Guard before coming home to care for her younger brother after their parents died in a highway accident. Since then, she'd been the quiet anchor of Elkhorn's small sheriff's department. Efficient, no nonsense, respected. Tonight, she was working a double shift because the storm had delayed the night crew. She stretched her arms, sighed, and reached for the radio. Something fell off. Calls had gone quiet all evening. Not even the usual dispatch chatter from road crews or medical teams. She made a note to call the plow company, then turned toward the bulletin board where a slip of paper caught her eye. Raymond Doyle. Unpaid medical invoices. Custody hearing next week. She frowned, then flipped open a drawer for his file. The man hadn't missed an appointment in months. Back beneath the bridge, Ranger approached the slope with caution. The scent was stronger now, coppery and sharp. Blood. Human blood. He barked once, short and quiet, testing the space. Nothing answered. He moved closer, paws skidding slightly on the ice-covered slope. When he reached the bottom, his tail dropped, body low, ears forward. He saw the shape then. Curled, unmoving, half buried in snow. Raymond's head lolled to the side at the sound of movement. He didn't fully register the figure at first, just the dark blur, the heat, the presence. Then he felt it, a warm nose against his cheek, a slow, waffling breath, a low whine, rising from a throat thick with instinct and recognition. Raymond opened his eyes and stared into the face of a dog. A scar above the left eye. Amber eyes. Black and tan coat, dusted white. Ranger. He didn't know the name, but something in him stirred, a flicker of hope. The dog didn't bark again. Instead, he moved beside Raymond, pressed his body close to the man's chest, and began scraping at the snow around the ropes. His teeth weren't sharp enough to chew through the cords, and his paws lacked precision, but he kept at it, clearing, licking, warming. Meanwhile, Deputy Carey Bell made a decision. She called dispatch. I need a location ping on Raymond Doyle's last known call. He was supposed to check in with his parole officer this morning. Nothing logged. The response was slow, filled with static. We have a hit. Ping came from Route 17, near the Elkhorn Crossing, about 6:45 p.m. Carey's eyebrows drew together. She knew that stretch of road. It cut behind a Ridgepoint yard, now mostly shuttered except for a few crews working off books. She grabbed her jacket and was halfway out the door when a familiar voice called from the corner. "You heading out in this mess, Carey?" asked Gary Lohman, a weathered road tech with a stubby mustache and faded yellow parka. He was in his 60s, half retired, and spent most nights tinkering with radios. "Guy might be missing," she replied. "Storm's gonna get worse," he warned. Carey glanced at the snow swirling outside. "Then I better be quick." Ranger, down below the bridge, pressed closer to Raymond. The man was drifting again, eyes fluttering. Ranger barked, this time louder. Once, twice, 3 times, then paused, then again. It was cadence, not coincidence. In the woods behind the slope, Howard Briggs stumbled through thigh-deep snow, flashlight flickering. He had followed Ranger's trail as best he could, but the storm had nearly erased it. Now, hearing the bark, his heart lurched. "That's you, isn't it?" he muttered, voice thick with emotion. He moved faster now, knees screaming in protest, until the bridge came into view. He saw the dog, then the man. Howard dropped to his knees and fumbled for his old Forest Ranger transceiver, the same model he'd used 20 years ago. He cranked the side handle until the static cleared, then pushed the call button. "This is Briggs. I have a man down at the Elkhorn Crossing." "Repeat, man down. Bridge base. Dog located. Request immediate medical support." Carey heard the call while halfway up the road. She floored the cruiser. Back under the bridge, Ranger had begun to dig more aggressively. Howard reached Raymond and checked for pulse. It was there, faint, erratic, but there. The dog didn't leave Raymond's side. When Howard tried to wrap a blanket over him, Ranger growled low, not in threat but in warning. "Stay back. He's mine." Carrie arrived 10 minutes later. She crouched beside Howard, assessing Raymond's vitals, then looked at Ranger. "He found him?" she asked. Howard nodded. "He's not just a dog. He's a promise I broke." As paramedics began to arrive, the snow softened, falling more gently now, like the town itself had paused to listen. Howard Briggs sat on the edge of a plastic hospital chair, hands clasped, thumbs twitching as he stared at the sterile floor. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and worry. Outside the window, the snow had eased into a soft fall, flakes drifting like pieces of ash over the dim-lit town of Elkhorn. Howard hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. Not since the EMTs had wheeled Raymond past on a stretcher, covered in frost, a breathing mask over his bruised face. Ranger had padded alongside them until a nurse gently ushered the dog aside. He'd sat by the sliding doors since, unmoving, his eyes tracking every movement. Howard, 59, had once been a strong man, both in frame and demeanor. 5'11", with a sturdy chest and forearms marked by decades of blue-collar work and military service. His hair was a steel gray, sweep-combed back behind large ears, and his face bore the kind of weather-worn lines that came from too many seasons spent outdoors. But there was a slackness in his posture now, a quiet collapse in the shoulders. Loss had done that. 7 years ago, cancer took his wife, Marion, and with her went the light in his world. In his grief, he had pushed everything away, including the dog that had saved his life during a forest fire on the Idaho border. That dog was Ranger, and Howard had left him at a ranger station, too broken to believe he could care for anything ever again. Now, watching Ranger through the hospital glass, Howard felt something stir. Not just guilt, but shame. This dog had not only survived without him, but tonight he had saved someone else. The sliding doors hissed open. A young woman stepped through, wiping sleet from her glasses. She wore dark scrubs under a forest green parka, her brown ponytail streaked with snowflakes. Dr. Eleanor Hart, mid-30s, slender and composed, moved with quiet authority. Her face was soft but focused, with sharp hazel eyes framed by light freckles. She'd grown up in Elkhorn, gone off to veterinary school, and returned after her father died to take over the small clinic on 5th Street. She crouched beside Ranger. "Hey, old boy, heard you were the hero tonight." Ranger didn't wag his tail. He leaned forward, nudging her coat with his snout. Howard stepped closer. "Is he okay?" Dr. Hart looked up. Some minor frostbite on his paw pads. Old joint damage in the rear leg, acting up from the cold. But no open wounds. "He's stable." Howard exhaled, long and low. "I used to be his handler." She stood. "Then you know he should be inside. Let's take him to my truck. It's warm, and I'll get him back to the clinic." She paused, noting the look in Howard's eyes. "You want to come?" Howard hesitated, then nodded. They drove in silence down snow-packed streets. The veterinary clinic was small, one-story, with a faded wooden sign and soft yellow porch light. Inside, Ranger was settled onto a padded mat near the heater. Dr. Hart checked his vitals, administered a light sedative, and rubbed salve onto his paw. Howard watched from the corner, hat clenched in his hands. "Why'd you give him up?" she asked without looking. Howard shifted. "My wife, she died. I shut down. Couldn't take care of myself, let alone him. I told myself it was mercy. He needed better." "But you didn't ask if he agreed," she said quietly. Howard nodded slowly. "No, I didn't." Ranger blinked slowly at the sound of Howard's voice, but didn't move. The sedative was working. At that moment, a soft chime rang as the front door opened. In stepped an older woman, bundled in a thick burgundy coat, wisps of silver hair poking from beneath her knit cap. This was Ruthie Carlson, 70, retired postmaster and longtime friend of Howard's wife. She lived alone on the edge of town, surrounded by rose bushes and dust-covered memories. Ruthie had a warm, firm presence, like a quilt layered over stone. "I heard what happened," she said, breathless from the cold. "I brought soup. And you?" She handed Howard a sealed envelope. "Marion asked me to give this to you. I've held it too long." Howard stared. "She left me a letter? She knew you wouldn't open it if she gave it to you in person." He took it with shaking fingers, sat down heavily on a bench, and read in silence. Ranger's breathing slowed beside him, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Marion's handwriting was steady, graceful. Howard, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know you better than anyone. You'll blame yourself, bury your heart, and forget how to forgive. Please don't. Grief makes us fools. But you're more than your pain. Don't turn away from the ones who stayed. Ranger stayed. I know you'll find him again. And when you do, give him something I no longer can, home. Howard folded the letter with trembling hands. He rose, walked to Ranger's side, and knelt. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't deserve your loyalty. But I'm here now, if you'll have me. Ranger stirred faintly, eyelids fluttering. Then, almost imperceptibly, his tail gave one slow, heavy wag. Outside, the snow had stopped completely. The streets were still, glowing faintly under the street lamps. In the distance, a plow moved slowly, scraping a path forward. The wind howled through the skeletal trees like a chorus of mourning spirits, pulling at Howard Briggs' coat as he stumbled down the snow-choked trail. Ice clung to his beard, and each breath cut into his lungs like broken glass. The storm had returned with sudden vengeance, angrier, louder, and colder than before. A wall of sleet and snow whipped across the ridgeline, blinding him. His flashlight beam barely reached past his boots, flickering in protest with every gust. But he didn't stop. Ahead, somewhere down the slope beyond the tree line and beyond visibility, a sound had pierced the storm's rage. 3 barks, a pause, 2 short bursts, then a long, drawn-out howl. A code, a memory. Ranger's code. Howard had taught it himself in a different life, back when both of them had been younger, faster, and whole. Back when they still believed they could outrun ghosts. Now, that old rhythm rose from the dark like a cry from the grave. Ranger was calling, and he was calling because someone was dying. Behind Howard, the safe path up the hill led toward town lights, faint, golden dots against the dark. If he turned now, he could find help. Call Carrie. Rouse EMTs. But it would take time, and time was not something Raymond Doyle had left. Howard gritted his teeth, adjusted the radio slung across his chest, and did something he hadn't done in years. He let instinct take over. He descended into the blizzard. Below the Elkhorn Bridge, Ranger stood guard like a sentinel of the forgotten. Snow had crusted over his back, and his breath steamed into the air in heavy, ragged clouds. His front paws were raw, bleeding slightly from where he had dug through ice and rock to reach Raymond's body. The man's skin had gone pale blue, lips cracked and trembling with shallow, reflexive gasps. Ranger curled against him again, pressing warmth into the man's chest, ears flicking constantly at every shift in wind. And then he barked again, code, precise and unwavering. He waited, listened, barked again. Miles away, another ear caught the signal. Carrie Bell stood on the edge of a snow-packed service road in her cruiser, scanning the ravine below with binoculars. Behind her sat Deputy Mason Lorne, a younger officer just 2 years into the force, short, stocky, with sandy hair and nervous hands that always tapped. Mason had grown up in Elkhorn, the son of a janitor and a school nurse, and joined the sheriff's office hoping to make the town feel safer than it had when his brother died of an overdose behind the same mill Raymond had last worked at. I think I heard something, Carrie said, lowering the lenses. Morse pattern. 3, 2, 1. Mason blinked. That's K9 distress code. Yeah, Carrie said. It's him. She keyed the mic. Dispatch. This is Unit 1. We're heading down Iron Cap Ravine. Prepare rescue. Then she glanced at Mason. Get the med sled ready. We're going on foot from here. Back in the woods, Howard slipped once hard. His knee slammed into a buried rock, and for a second he gasped, seeing stars. But then he heard it again, one long howl, deep and desperate. Hold on, Ranger, he croaked, teeth clenched. I'm coming. Minutes later, or perhaps hours, time had lost all meaning. Howard reached the base of the slope, his flashlight beam catching on a crumpled body nearly lost beneath the snow. Raymond lay twisted, face turned sideways, mouth gagged and breath shallow. But alive. And beside him, Ranger, half buried, sides heaving, eyes flicking toward Howard like flickers of an old fire. Howard dropped to his knees. Oh, God. He pressed 2 fingers to Raymond's throat. Weak pulse. Faint but there. He pulled off his coat and threw it over the man's chest. Then he turned to Ranger, voice trembling. You did it. You actually did it. Ranger licked at his bleeding paw and gave a short, exhausted whine. Howard's fingers trembled as he reached for the radio. He cranked the handle, wincing at the cold grinding against his swollen knuckles. A burst of static filled the air. Then he pressed the button. This is Briggs. We have a confirmed victim at the base of Elkhorn Bridge. Alive but critical. K-9 on scene. Immediate extraction requested. Back on the road, Carrie and Mason picked up the call. Move, she ordered, and together they plunged into the ravine with a medical sled bouncing behind them. Howard stayed beside Raymond, holding his wrist, whispering things the man couldn't hear. You got a kid, right? Jesse? You hang on, son. You're going to see him again. Ranger had collapsed, body curled protectively against Raymond's side, eyes half closed. His tail twitched once, weak but determined. Minutes later, boots crunched on snow. Carrie knelt beside them, quickly assessing vitals. Still breathing, she said. Let's go. Mason worked the straps of the med sled, while Carrie wrapped warming packs around Raymond's hands and neck. Howard looked to Ranger. He comes too. Carrie met his gaze. Wasn't going to leave him. Together, they lifted both man and dog onto the sled. The wind began to die down, just slightly, as the sled pulled up towards safety. Hours later, Raymond would be stabilized in the trauma unit, hooked to warming machines and IVs, his heart barely winning the battle. Ranger would lie curled in a heated kennel at Dr. Hart's clinic, his breathing shallow but steady. And Howard would sit on the porch outside with a blanket around his shoulders, gripping the radio in his hands like a lifeline. The blizzard had passed, but something else had cracked open that night, something buried and frozen long ago. Redemption didn't come clean or loud. Sometimes it arrived in 3 barks, 2 short and 1 long. A dull fluorescent light buzzed overhead as Raymond Doyle blinked into consciousness. The ceiling tiles above him were unfamiliar, stark white, some speckled with water stains. He felt the weight of cotton blankets pressing his chest, a chill still lingering deep inside his bones. His hands, now free, rested loosely by his sides, for lines curling from his wrists. For a long moment, he didn't know where he was. Then came the memory. The snow, the bridge, the ropes, the breath of a dog, the cold that had felt like death. He turned his head and winced. A woman sat beside his bed, a notepad in hand and a badge clipped to her parka. Detective Marla Jennings was in her early 40s, tall and fine-boned with olive skin and jet black hair tied tightly at the nape of her neck. She had sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, and dark brown eyes that studied him with quiet intensity. Her clothing was practical, fleece-lined cargo pants and a thermal sweater under a navy utility vest. Her demeanor was cool, but not unkind. You're at North Valley Regional, she said gently. You were found unconscious beneath the Elkhorn Bridge. It's been 18 hours. Raymond's lips cracked when he tried to speak. The dog. Marla softened. He's alive. Barely, but stable. The vet said he wouldn't have lasted much longer. Neither would you. He exhaled slowly, then looked toward the window. The snow outside had turned to a gentle flurry. I need to tell you something, he said, voice hoarse. Marla flipped open her notepad. Go ahead. Raymond recounted all, everything he remembered. The conversation he had overheard in the Ridgepoint yard, the 2 men with the marked vests moving crates that weren't logged, the unusual tire tracks leading to the utility tunnel, the sudden ambush. His hands trembled as he spoke. They're using the courthouse construction to move equipment. Expensive stuff, scanners, cables, electronics. I heard names, not just workers. A foreman, maybe someone in city planning. Marla's pen paused. You remember the names? He nodded. One was Larson. Other, I think it was Weller. Or Wellerby. He said the crates needed to be gone by Monday. She stood. That's enough to open a full-scale investigation. Raymond turned back toward the ceiling. I didn't mean to get involved. I just wanted to bring home enough money to keep my boy on his meds. Marla nodded once. You may have just saved more than your son. 2 buildings down, at Elkhorn Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Eleanor Hart leaned over Ranger's still body. The old shepherd lay on his side, hooked up to a small oxygen mask, a bandage wrapped around one paw. His breathing was shallow but rhythmic. A saline bag dangled above him, the drip echoing softly in the quiet room. Howard sat on the bench beside the examination table, staring at the floor. I don't know if he'll get back to full strength, Eleanor said, voice low. He's old, Howard, and he's been living rough for years. I know, Howard replied, but I need to make this right. She looked at him, tilting her head slightly. You sure about that? Howard met her gaze. I'm not asking to erase anything, just to earn a little of it back. Eleanor nodded. Then take him home when he's ready. He'll want somewhere familiar to heal. From across the room, a soft voice called. Is this the dog that saved the man? They turned. A boy stood at the door, about 9 years old, wiry, with messy blonde hair and oversized boots that squeaked against the floor. His name was Elijah Byrne, a local foster kid, known for sneaking into the clinic to sit with injured animals. He rarely spoke to adults and always smelled faintly of hay and peanut butter. But there was a light in his eyes, curious and cautious. Yeah, Eleanor smiled. That's him. Elijah tiptoed over. He sat cross-legged near Ranger's head, not touching, just watching. What's his name? Ranger, Howard said, clearing his throat. The boy nodded solemnly. He looks tired. He is, Howard said, but he's still here. Elijah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small stuffed wolf with a frayed ear. He placed it gently beside Ranger's paw. He can borrow this till he feels better. Eleanor smiled faintly. Thank you, Elijah. That's kind. The boy stood, nodded, and vanished out the door with a whisper of boots on linoleum. That evening, in Raymond's hospital room, a knock sounded. The door creaked open and Carrie Bell stepped inside with a warm coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. Her uniform was dusted with salt from the thawing streets, and her brown hair was tied up beneath a knit beanie. I figured you'd be awake by now, she said, setting the coffee on the tray beside him. Could have brought bourbon, Raymond rasped. She grinned. Still on pain meds? Don't push your luck. She handed him the folder. Inside were 2 photos, low-res surveillance images. The men who had ambushed him. Names? She asked. Raymond looked. That's Larson, he said, tapping the older one with a stocky build and gray beard. Foreman. The younger guy. Yeah, Wellerby. Carrie nodded. We're pulling permits and internal logs. We've already flagged 7 irregular shipments under their names. You did good, Ray. Raymond closed the folder. You get the dog? Carrie's smile softened. He's with Howard Briggs. Healing. That dog didn't leave your side. Not once. A silence fell between them, thick but comfortable. Then she reached in her pocket and handed him a photo. Jesse, his son, holding a small sign that said, "See you soon, Dad." Raymond blinked rapidly. Thanks. That night, Howard sat by the fire in his cabin just outside town. Ranger lay curled on a blanket nearby, his breathing steady. A mug of broth steamed on the floor beside him. Outside, snow melted slowly beneath the porch light, dripping in steady rhythm. Howard reached down and scratched the soft fur behind Ranger's ear. You came back, he whispered. Now let me be the one who stays. Ranger didn't stir, but his tail thumped once against the wood. A promise made, a promise renewed. The late afternoon sun slanted low over Elkhorn, Wyoming, casting long golden beams across the snowmelt fields and into the old train depot that had once been forgotten by time. The building, long abandoned with broken rafters and rust-stained walls, now pulsed with life. A fresh-painted sign hung proudly above the front door, crafted from reclaimed wood and hand-carved with a steady hand. Ranger's Path, K-9 Community Training and Outreach Center. Inside, the large open space had been transformed. Rubber floor mats lined the old freight hall, and agility ramps, scent search lanes, and training obstacles had been carefully arranged. Along the back wall stood a photo gallery of working dogs, both past and present, some in action, others caught in quiet moments of loyalty. And at the very center of it all lay the one who started it, Ranger. though his muzzle was grayer than ever, and he walked with a pronounced limp. Ranger still moved with quiet pride. His coat had regained its luster, thanks to care, food, and something else, love. He lay on a thick mat beside a space heater, one paw resting protectively on the stuffed wolf left by Elijah Byrne, which had now become something of a mascot. Children who trained there were taught never to touch it. It belonged to Ranger. Howard Briggs moved slowly along the edge of the room, clipboard in hand. He now wore a uniform shirt. Not police issue, but a deep forest green with the embroidered badge of Ranger's Path over his heart. His gait remained stiff, especially on cold days, but his eyes were clearer now. Steadier. He spoke with volunteers, checked on supplies, gave nods of approval. In every movement, there was purpose. Raymond Doyle stood by the far gate, a pair of gloves tucked in his back pocket and a whistle around his neck. He looked healthier, stronger. The bruises that once decorated his ribs and jaw were long gone, replaced with the quiet confidence of someone who had come back from the edge. His son, Jesse, now visited every weekend, and today was special. Jesse stood beside his father now, a little thinner than most boys his age, but with more brightness in his eyes than ever before. 9 years old, sandy brown hair, a tousled mess beneath his winter hat. Jesse had spent years retreating from noise, from people, from anything unpredictable. His illness had made him cautious, quiet, old before his time. But now, as he crouched in front of Ranger, one small hand resting on the dog's flank, he laughed. Openly, easily, the kind of laugh that bounced off walls and warmed every cold heart in the room. Ranger stirred at the sound and blinked slowly at the boy, then nudged Jesse's knee with his nose. Jesse giggled and leaned in close, whispering something no one else could hear. From across the hall, a voice called, "Raymond, you got a sec?" It was Jill Sanderson, the center's co-director and community outreach lead. Jill was in her mid-30s, petite with broad shoulders and an unruly halo of auburn curls tucked under a backwards baseball cap. Her flannel shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms streaked with dust, marker, and, somehow, dog fur. She had once worked in a corporate HR department in Chicago before moving to Elkhorn after a burnout and mental breakdown. Here, among dogs and dirt and real people, she had found herself again. Raymond jogged over. "What's up?" "We've got a visitor," she said, nodding toward the front. Standing in the doorway was Officer Daniel Thorne, a tall, lanky man in his early 40s, with a receding hairline and a permanent look of surprise etched into his pale, freckled face. He wore the town's sheriff badge, but had always been more of a paperwork man than field presence. "I've got good news," he said. "The Ridgepoint smuggling investigation closed. All suspects indicted. Larson pled guilty. Weller buys try and cut a deal. Either way, you did a hell of a thing, Doyle." Raymond exhaled slowly, a tension lifting from his shoulders. "Thanks, done. I just didn't want it to happen to someone else." Thorne nodded, then looked toward Ranger. "He's still the top dog?" Raymond grinned. "Always." Meanwhile, outside the center, the backlot was being prepped for the first K9 community demo. Volunteers were helping set up chairs and a small speaker system, while a group of local children from Elkhorn Elementary gathered near the fence, peeking through excitedly. Among them was Elijah Byrne, his coat still a little too big, hands stuffed into mismatched gloves. He held a clipboard and barked gentle orders to the others, organizing cones, lining up leashes. Eleanor Hart had recruited him as the youngest official junior assistant. Howard watched the boy from a distance, then turned to Ranger. "You started something here," he murmured. "You gave all of us a second leash on life." Inside, the building had quieted. Jesse leaned against Ranger's side, his small hand rhythmically stroking the dog's chest. "Dad," Jesse asked softly. Raymond looked down. "Yeah, buddy. Do you think he remembers?" Raymond smiled. "Every second." Howard stepped in just as the boy said it, and he paused, watching the scene unfold. His eyes shimmered, but the tears never fell. Not sorrow anymore. Not grief. Just fullness. Belonging. Eleanor entered from the side door, carrying a tray of thermoses and biscuits. She paused when she saw Howard, then offered a knowing smile. "They're waiting for you." Howard cleared his throat. "Let's not keep them." That afternoon, Ranger led the first demonstration. Not with speed or flair, his body no longer allowed for those things, but with calm precision and dignity. When Howard gave him the signal, he rose slowly, walked to a mark, sat, and then barked once. The crowd cheered. Some clapped, others wiped their eyes. Ranger didn't react much. He just sat quietly, tail curled beside him, eyes fixed forward. But for those who knew, it was enough. In Elkhorn, one life had been saved beneath a bridge, but many more had been rebuilt in its echo. Sometimes, the quietest hearts carry the loudest courage. Ranger didn't need words to save a life. He didn't need medals to remind people of his worth. All he needed was the instinct to care and the loyalty to stay when no one else did. In a world that often forgets the broken, the aging, the lost, this story reminds us that redemption is always possible, that second chances are worth fighting for, and that sometimes the ones we leave behind are the very ones who save us in the end. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Who in your life needs a second chance? Who might be waiting in silence, hoping someone still believes in them? Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Comment below your thoughts. And if you believe in loyalty, healing, and the quiet miracles that walk among us, type amen in the comments. Subscribe for more true stories that restore faith, and may God bless and protect you and those you love.